Hi, it's Katrina. Number 10. The Fortress under Alcatraz. Alcatraz is famous for being an ultra-secure prison that housed some of the worst criminals in American history, including the likes of Prohibition gangster Al Capone. But hiding underneath the prison, below the foundations of the building, are the ruins of a hidden military complex. Researchers have revealed pieces of the military fortress from the 1860s. Long before Alcatraz was ever an offshore prison site in the San Francisco Bay, it was a U.S. military base. Underground structures were built in the middle of the 19th century as part of a large-scale fortification operation. Researchers from Binghamton University discovered these lost structures using scans and radar to look beneath the island. They identified a vaulted brick tunnel and ancient ventilation ducts, all just inches below the ground. According to archaeologist Timothy DeSmet, who was involved in the research, the concrete surface of the recreation yard is thin. Directly underneath it is earthwork from the original military fortress. But even deeper are the ruins of the original lighthouse, the very first thing built by modern humans on the island of Alcatraz. These ruins haven't been found yet, but they must be underneath the other layers of construction somewhere. The lighthouse on Alcatraz was short-lived, replaced by the military fortification in the 1800s. Then, less than a century later in the early 1900s, the military infrastructure was converted into a prison. That continued until Alcatraz became too expensive to run and closed in 1963. Number 9. The tunnels at Baiae. Baiae was a village on the shore of the Bay of Naples in Italy, which flourished due to its proximity to the much larger city of Naples. It was a coastal city not far from a volcanic complex of terrifying proportions. Close to the city of Baiae is a geological marvel called the Phlegraean Fields. When the Greeks settled in the area, they saw the fields as a kind of hellish landscape that they immediately associated with the land of the dead. That's because the fields are part of the caldera of a volcano that was once the twin of Mount Vesuvius to the east. The volcano erupted in 1538, but it has since remained dormant. Much of its crater is currently underwater, and the only bit that's accessible is a flat land of rubble shrouded by clouds of sulfurous gas. To the Greeks, this really did look like a landscape from the underworld. In the 1960s, archaeologist Robert Paget explored a mysterious complex of underground tunnels spreading out from the city of Baiae. These tunnels were carved at least 2,700 years ago, maybe even earlier. The underground corridors are like a scary labyrinth of pure darkness, likely meant to simulate a descent into Hades. To the Greeks, Hades was a very real place. They believed that certain parts of the earth opened to allow passage down into the underworld. The Phlegraean Fields was one of these places, inaccessible to the living because they would choke on the toxic smoke and die. The underground tunnels were likely used in death rituals. There was possibly even a local oracle of the dead who told prophecies to those brave enough to traverse the underground halls. Number 8. Predjama Castle. In southern Slovenia is Predjama Castle, a mighty fortification carved into the side of a cliff and extending 9 miles underneath it. This mysterious castle, which has been standing for over 800 years, was once used to help a local hero evade capture. It's been labeled the largest cave castle in the world, like something out of a bizarre fairy tale. The facade of the castle extends out from the cave mouth roughly 400 feet above ground. The castle then appears to shrink as its rooms and turrets move deeper into the cavern. Once out of sight, there are miles upon miles of tunnels, chambers, and secrets that still have yet to be uncovered. The first mention of this castle dates back to 1202, but it didn't become famous until the 15th century when Erasem Luger, a famous knight, moved in. He was like the Eastern European version of Robin Hood. He would steal from the rich and give to the poor. When Austria and Hungary went to war in the 1400s, Luger allied himself with the Hungarians and fled to Predjama Castle. From there, he continued to wreak havoc on the countryside by sneaking out of his castle through secret underground passages. He continued stealing from the rich and giving money to the poor people of Hungary. When the Austrians attempted to take his castle in 1484, they failed. It was too difficult to find their way through. In the end, Erez Zemluger was killed by a stray cannonball that shattered the wall of his bathroom as he sat on the toilet. Number 7. Midnight Terror Cave. There is an underground pit of darkness in Belize called the Midnight Terror Cave. It got its name after a looter discovered its entrance, fell inside, and was injured. A local Mennonite community rescued the looter, and shortly after, archaeologists were informed of this shocking discovery. Researchers with California State University surveyed the cave in 2008, discovering the remains of an unbelievable 118 sacrificial victims. These were people killed by the Maya civilization between 250 and 925 AD. The Nightmare Terror Cave is currently one of the most horrific sacrificial zones ever used by the Maya. For a reason still unknown, the Maya dragged willing or unwilling victims into this dark and dreary pit in the earth, then killed them in worship of Chak, the Maya rain god. Chak was believed to use his lightning axe to strike the clouds above and produce torrents of rain. He was almost like the Mayan version of Thor, but not many people have heard of him before. So why did the Maya feel it necessary to sacrifice people to their rain god? Researchers believe it was because they were experiencing significant drought. In a desperate bid to appease the gods, they killed dozens of people in the underground, hoping for rain. But that rain never came, and their civilization came crashing down. And now for number 6. But first, I want to give a big shout out to Mark Robles and Jerry Miles. Thanks so much for watching and supporting Origins Explained. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe and join the family. Number 6. The Tomb of the Winter Solstice. A team of archaeologists from the University of Malaga recently uncovered what is believed to be the oldest ancient Egyptian tomb oriented to the winter solstice. This doesn't mean the oldest Egyptian tomb in history, but the oldest one positioned in such a way that the light of the winter solstice shines through its opening and illuminates the dusty corridor of the tomb. The tomb was discovered at the necropolis of Kubet el Hawa on the western bank of the Nile, not far from the city of Aswan. It was here where many ancient nobles and priests were buried during the Old Kingdom of ancient Egypt. This particular tomb likely belonged to the governor of the city of Elephantine in 1830 BC. You might be wondering how researchers know that the tomb was oriented toward the winter solstice almost 4,000 years ago. Researchers were able to use software that calculates the position of the sun in ancient times. It's different than it is now. 40 centuries ago, the sun on the morning of the winter solstice pointed directly into the tomb and made it shine brilliantly. This was likely to do with the Egyptian idea of rebirth, with the tomb mimicking the solar cycle. The winter solstice was seen as the victory of sunlight over darkness, an important piece of symbolism. Number 5. The Guyaju Caves. The Guyaju Caves are all that remain of a ruined cave complex occupied by a semi-subterranean group of people living near Beijing about 2,000 years ago. The origins of the community are extremely mysterious because nobody knows who founded the city, why they disappeared, or what kind of community they even had. The settlement may have been established during the Liao dynasty, but no one's sure. Some Chinese historians theorize the caves were occupied by outlaws. Some believe it may have been a military garrison, but the truth is that we just don't know. The caves themselves are carved out of the solid rock face of a cliff. The rooms are packed so closely together, one on top of the other, that it gives the illusion of a beehive. There are approximately 117 caves linked like a gigantic subterranean apartment building. Within those caves are 350 chambers, with the palace of the chieftain located at the very bottom of the complex. We know where the ruler lived because the residence is significantly more elaborate than the rest, with huge support columns and 8 massive rooms. The Guyaju Caves were discovered in 1984, and yet we are still no closer to learning the identity of the builders. There are no historical records of people living in the caves. Also, archaeologists believe they only occupied the extensive place for around 30 years. It took an insane amount of effort to carve a city in the rock of a cliff, and then the people just packed up and moved away, leaving no traces of themselves behind. Number 4. Mega ripples. 66 million years ago, an asteroid struck the surface of the planet and devastated all life, causing the dinosaurs to go extinct. The exact impact point was the Yucatan Peninsula. This space rock hit Mexico so hard that the surface of the planet rippled like a stone being dropped in the water. These ripples were created by a shockwave so intense that most creatures caught within it died. The geological scars left behind by the blast are called mega ripples, and some of them are 5 stories tall. Researchers recently identified some of these mega ripples hiding underneath Louisiana. Imagine a bowling ball falling onto a flat and sandy beach. It impacts the ground so hard that ripples stretch out from the impact zone. Then, before the sand can rest flat again, it freezes solid. That is very similar to what happened with the dinosaur-killing asteroid. It emitted such power that the ground itself rippled, and those ripples never smoothed out. That's why researchers just found 52-foot-tall ripples hiding roughly 5,000 feet beneath central Louisiana. These ripples formed immediately after the asteroid hit Mexico. The reason you don't see them now is that over the following millions of years, the Earth's surface changed. Oceans came and went, millions of tons of soil shifted, and the ripples, like a series of rolling hills, were buried thousands of feet beneath where the surface is now. Number 3. The Kansas Salt Underground. Hidden underneath Kansas are winding tunnels where people have been extracting salt for decades. Hiding 650 feet below the surface of Kansas are multiple salt deposits that formed as far back as 280 million years ago. One of the biggest and most impressive salt mines is Strataka in Hutchinson. It's one of the 16 salt mines in the United States and the only one open to tourists. The salt mine began operation in 1923 under the ownership of the Carey Salt Company. The mine quickly grew to cover an astounding 980 acres. If each excavated chamber were connected to one another, they would stretch for a staggering 150 miles. Each room of extracted salt is held together structurally by solid salt pillars about 40 feet square, creating unbelievable natural columns like the pillars holding up some underground dwarf ruin. It's possible to visit these amazing underground facilities. Just keep in mind you have to descend deep into the Earth's surface, and that can be a truly humbling experience. Number 2. Aqueduct under Armenian melon field. In 2019, German researchers shoveled aside a patch of ripe melons on a hot summer day. They then broke the surface of the melon field where they were conducting their investigation and found a huge slab of Roman concrete. The concrete was just a few inches below the field, about as unsuspecting of a place as you can find. In the middle of this green, grassy field in Armenia, littered with juicy melons, there was a forgotten Roman secret waiting to be uncovered. The slab of stone discovered is now believed to be one of the hundreds of foundation stones running through the field. These foundation stones were part of an unfinished Roman aqueduct. The aqueduct was originally built around the 2nd century AD, intended to bring fresh water to the city of Artashat. However, the aqueduct was never finished. The Romans managed to build over 15 miles of it, but then stopped. Historians aren't sure exactly what happened, but believe it may have had to do with a local uprising. In 117 AD, the Roman-controlled Armenian capital of Artashat revolted against their oppressors. The chaos and violence that followed the rebellion interrupted the Romans' plans. The aqueduct was abandoned, the Romans were pushed out of the city, and they never did get the fresh water that they so desperately needed. The bits and pieces of the aqueduct's post-production are now largely hidden underneath a gigantic field of watermelons. Number 1. Old Faithful. Old Faithful is one of the most famous features of Yellowstone National Park. It's a never-ending, erupting column of steam and super hot water, and it's always captivated visitors to the park. Not long ago, researchers discovered an underground cavern that contains the plumbing for Old Faithful, allowing researchers to finally see exactly how the famous geyser works. About 50 feet beneath the geyser, slightly southwest of where the water comes out, is a massive chamber. The researchers were not able to determine exactly how large, but they say it is a huge egg-shaped void at least 50 feet tall. The void connects directly to a pipe angled 24 degrees up and pointed directly at Old Faithful's mouth. Of course, this isn't a metal pipe, but one carved into the ground by natural processes. Scientists call it a geyser conduit. Gas bubbles within the underground chamber act like the boiling bubbles in a heated pot full of water. Geophysicist Jean van de Mollebroek from the University of Savoie said the team was able to physically watch the water rise, enter the conduit, and blast out of Old Faithful. This process happens every 92 minutes. Tiny eruptions create the gas bubbles, which creates heat and pressure, and then the hot water is pushed to the surface. After each blast, it takes roughly 15 minutes for everything to reset. More water flows into the chamber, and seismic activity increases. After an hour and a half, there is another violent steam explosion, just like clockwork. Thanks for watching! What's your favorite underground discovery? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Come back soon. Bye!